The task of this assignment is to use for loop and the do while loop to do some calculation. So in Visual Basic, not only in Visual Basic, in any programming language, we have two types of loops. One is called the for loop, when we know the list of data that we want to use for any particular calculation, or we have a do while loop or do until loop that is required. That is very useful actually in case you are taking the data from user menu or from user. So let's do the same process. I'm going to use the same Excel that I used for the assignment number 1. I'm going to Visual Basic Code. I already have a function called the factorial. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to initialize variables for the same. So let's quickly initialize some variables. So very first variable I'm going to use in this assignment is uh, input data, which is going to be my integer value. I'm keeping it simple with integer, and I'm going to use one output data as long, and I'm also going to use one index value, which is going to be an integer type, and that I'll use for a for loop. So second thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to reach the data from Excel, which where I'm going to use the range function. So I'm going to input data equal to range, which is already available in F2 cell. I will show you. I'll verify this one. And the next thing I'm going to do is going to use for loop. So for index, which is I'm going to start with 1, 2, and that will go till input data, and the factorial will be out data, which is index multiplied by out data, and I'm going to use next. So, and the next step I'm going to do is assign to cell. So range F3 is equal to out data. So this is done. Now let's go to our Excel, and let's say I want to calculate the factorial for 3. So that is showing me 0 because I need to initialize this output data with some value, and by default in Visual Basic, if you define a data as integer or long, by default the value will be 1. So let me initialize with 1, and let's go to this part and say calculate 6, right? So 1 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 3 equal to 6. Now let's say I want to calculate the factorial for 5, that is 5 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 3, 2 and 1, that is 120. So that is our for loop. There are certain conditions that I want to put it here. For example, if input data is in negative, then we just need to put output as a invalid data. So in the same part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one more loop, which is do until loop, and I'll calculate the user input data, and the only condition here is I want to break the loop when user will provide any negative data for the same. So let's define some variables here. Let's say I want to define the output variable, which is as a long, and I want to use some user data, user input as integer, which is a smaller value. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use do until function, loop until, and here I'll put the condition like if user input is less than 0, then break the loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize this user input with initial value that is 1, that is actually 0, and I'm going to read the user input data from the input box. So it is input box, and I'm typing here please enter a number to calculate to add, else enter -1 to quit. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the output variable here is equal to output variable plus whatever you provided in your input table, input part, so this one. And at the end of loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use message box to print output data. So let me quickly do it. So it is done. Now I'm going to run this function. So let me quickly run it. I think we need to comment this one or cut this, save it and run it. So sum of number, okay, run it. I want to add 3, I want to add 4, so that will give me the 7, and I want to put -1, and you can see the output is 7. So that's the end of loop concept in VBA. Thank you.